So here's a thought. What if being deeply, seriously religious isn't actually the same thing as being spiritually alive? We're about to dive into a pretty radical idea from an ancient text that suggests true spiritual life isn't about perfecting the world you're in, but about stepping into a completely new one. You know, this whole idea is kicked off with this amazing Korean proverb, and it just frames the topic perfectly. When you've only ever known the well, you mistake its walls for the boundaries of the entire universe. It's such a powerful metaphor for a spiritual life that might feel really full, but is actually, well, contained. And this analogy just hits it home, right? Think about it. A fish in a tiny tank, it's only going to get so big. Its environment literally defines its potential. But you put that same fish in the open water and boom, its potential is unlocked. The suggestion here is that a purely religious world, as good as it might be, can sometimes be like that small tank. Super busy, super familiar, but ultimately it can limit real spiritual life. Okay, so to really dig into this, the story brings in this character, a man who from the outside looked like he had it all figured out. This guy wasn't just in the tank, he was the model fish, but he came with a question that his whole world just couldn't answer. And this guy's name was Nicodemus. And get this, he wasn't some outsider looking for answers, no. He was the ultimate insider, a Pharisee, a member of the top religious council. I mean, think of him as like a top-tier theologian or a super respected community leader today. He knew the system inside and out, he followed all the rules, and everyone looked up to him for it. Which, of course, brings up the big question, right? If this guy had it all, why did he approach Jesus in secret, under the cover of darkness? The story hints that for all his status and all his knowledge, there was something in his soul that was still searching, something his very well-defined world just wasn't giving him. And the answer Jesus gives him? Oh man, it is not what he was expecting at all. It wasn't a new tip or a better technique or a new role to follow. It was a complete teardown and rebuild of his entire understanding of spiritual life. Jesus looks at him and says this, "Can you just imagine being Nicodemus? A master of religion, a guy who has dedicated his entire life to this stuff? And you're being told you have to start all over again. Not just try harder, be born." This wasn't about a minor adjustment. It was about a whole new beginning. The message couldn't be clearer. All that impressive religious stuff you've built, that's not the point. And this is where it gets really interesting. Look at this contrast. So many of us, right, we think of faith as self-improvement. Just try a little harder, learn a bit more, pray more. But what Jesus was describing was something fundamentally different. It's not about polishing up the old you. It's about receiving a brand new life that comes directly from God. It's a change of your very origin, not just your behavior. So, the uncontrollable wind. As you can imagine, Nicodemus is just baffled. He's thinking in nuts and bolts, you know? But Jesus explains this new birth thing using this incredible metaphor that points away from human control and toward this wild, divine mystery. And here's the key. The phrase is literally born from above. It's all about the source. This isn't something you can achieve with more effort or more discipline. It's a gift. It originates completely outside of you from God's Spirit. The whole wind analogy just makes this crystal clear. You can't see the wind, right? You can't just make wind happen. You can't order it around. It's this powerful, invisible force. But you can absolutely see its effects. The trees start to bend, the leaves rustle. In the same way, this spiritual life isn't something produced by a religious system, but its effects become undeniably visible in a person's life. So, to really drive home what this receiving actually looks like, Jesus brings up this old story from Israel's history. Basically, people were dying from snake bites, and God's solution wasn't some complicated 10-step program. As you can see here, it was just acknowledge the problem, forget all the complex human ideas, and simply look at the solution God provided. The healing wasn't earned, it was received by a simple act of trusting and looking. All right, a slow public change. So the big question is, what happened to Nicodemus? Did this conversation actually change anything? Well, the story shows us that this new birth wasn't some sudden, flashy explosion for him. Instead, what we see is the slow, steady, and increasingly public transformation. And this timeline, wow, it just lays out his journey perfectly. He starts in the dark, right? Hidden, cautious. But then later, he actually speaks up for Jesus in the council. That took guts. And then finally, at the most dangerous moment possible, he goes all in. publicly and costly identifying with Jesus by caring for his body. The man who came in darkness ends up standing in the light. And that's such a huge takeaway from his story. This new birth isn't always a single emotional firework moment. More often, it's like a new starting point, a new direction that, step by step, completely reshapes an entire life from the inside out. The invitation to look. This is where it all comes together. The ancient story suddenly becomes this really personal question for you and me, right here, right now. So the first question it asks is for anyone who kind of feels like Nicodemus. Are you super active in religion? You do all the things, but deep down, you're just not sure if all that activity actually equals real spiritual life. Then it goes a little deeper. Have you been trusting your history? Your religious background, your family's faith, your good track record? Maybe more than you've been trusting in God's grace, moment by moment? And then there's this last one, and it's a biggie. Have you been managing your faith like it's a project, with spreadsheets and goals and effort, instead of simply receiving life as a gift? And that really brings us to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? The whole point of this entire encounter is this. This life isn't something you can earn. It's not something you can manufacture. But what you can do, just like those people in the wilderness, is turn your heart and look toward the one God has provided. So we're left with this simple 3-step invitation. Step out. Step out of the well, out of the small tank, out of the familiar system. Look to Christ and receive life. It leaves us with a pretty provocative question, doesn't it? What if the greatest journey isn't about becoming a better version of yourself, but about being born into a new one?